What's going on YouTube? Warstorm here, coming at you guys in the video. Today I figured it was a good time to talk about the time rules since we are about a year after their implementation, and let's face it, it is the off season, so outside of bandless speculation and worlds, there's not a whole lot to really talk about. However, this is, I think, something that we can talk about, and I feel like it's something that's a good topic to cover. But before we talk about the time rules and what Konami could do to change it, maybe make it better, we have to know why these rules are in place. We're gonna take a couple of trips down memory lane. The first one is gonna be my very first regional back in, I believe it was Primal Origin had just came out. It was 2014, mid 2014. This is an interesting time in Yu-Gi-Oh. Obviously Duelist Alliance was the following set. However, at this time we were in a much slower format because the top best decks at the time were Mermail, Fire Fist, and Yugioh. And while Mermail didn't play a lot of back row, there was a pretty significant amount of traps running around in virtually every deck of the format at the time. So if you're looking at the metagame in that regard, it was a very grind-based format. Even though those decks were good, they weren't so much better than everything else. And the only really gatekeeping card, I believe at the time, was Soul Charge wasn't super expensive, so the only card you really could justify saying, being a paywall was number 101 Silent Honor Arc. If you had that card, you had a pretty good chance to do well at most regionals and events at the time. So the biggest problem with this format at the time, because it had the old time rules, I remember the head judge was giving us super bad hard time about taking too long. So if you're unfamiliar with how the old time rules work, in case you just weren't playing at the time, when time was called after that 40-minute timer ran out, whoever's turn it was would be called turn 0, and then after their turn ended, there would be 5 turns after that. So depending on how much time was left in that current turn, you would have as many as 5 turns in time. What this contributed to was longer event times. And it would be anywhere from an extra 3 to 4 hours depending on the event. And the head judges were constantly badgering us about taking too long. This was something I don't remember every single regional I went to that at this time the judge was giving us a hard time for taking too long. And it was getting to the point that by May, before the time rules, this was, I think, about the regional I had right after Flame of Destruction came out. This was May 2014, I think, or 2018, before Nationals. I took Pendulum Magicians to the event. This was an interesting time period because while Sky Strikers weren't quite out yet, the Goki had just gotten all the Nightmares. Spirals were still very good because Nightmare Unicorn had just come out and Goblin had just come out. And Draco and Pendulum Magicians decks were very grindy, very long turns, and the judge, and I remember I was in, this was round 5, this was right before I dropped. My opponent, we were going into time, my opponent had turn 0, he made the full spiral board, and then I spent about, I think maybe, the judge came over to watch her around, and I spent maybe 30 seconds shuffling my hand, trying to figure out, is there a way I can out this board? There likely wasn't, but it didn't really matter because the judge gave me a slow play warning. And I want you guys to understand that as a player, I pride myself on not doing that. There was one time at my last regional I was playing Sky Striker in round 1 where I had about 3 to 4 minutes left on the clock. So it was turn 2, I had Lancey at him, so we were in turn 2 and we were close to time. I likely had the opportunity with the hand I had, because it was a very good hand, to completely combo off and spend a whole lot of time. I had a Shark Cannon, there was a Goliath engraved, so I was going to be in a winning position regardless, but instead of stalling out the time just to guarantee a win, I went ahead and just, set all my stuff, Shark Cannon the Goliath, and then pass turn back to him. So the fact that I was given a slow play warning just gives you an idea of how much pressure a lot of these judges were under, likely from Konami staff, to make the players play faster. Unfortunately, this was and with some of the deck design, with decks like True Draco and some of these other super combo heavy long turn decks, it just naturally something had to change. When you're having upwards of 40 minutes or in time, it added a whole nother layer of, extra time to the event. So circa later that year, we got, of course, right after this format where we had Draco and Goki and all that, right before Nationals, they changed the time rules. So instead of having those 5 turns in time, we now have what we currently have, which is the current phase. Now the strengths of this is obviously that we're not ending events at, we're ending events earlier. Even at Nationals, where some of my buddies were playing before they ended up dropping, both of them ended up getting their third loss around round 8 or round 9. Even at Nationals, we were finished and back at the hotel by 9 o'clock. This is Nationals. You compare this to a regional level with much less people, with much less organization. At this regional, I believe it with the old time rules when I was playing DDD, I had round 8 at 9 o'clock, so I didn't get home till almost 10 o'clock that night. But Nationals with the new time rules, we were done by 8 and went to eat back at the hotel by 9. That gives you an idea of how much time is now saved by regional standards. And my last regional I think it was round 8. We only had 8 rounds when I finally left, and I was home by 6-7 o'clock. So in that regard, you can understand why Konami had to change something. Nevertheless, it has contributed to a ton of problems. One of my biggest gripes is not the burn gimmicks, not all the nonsense and slow playing and check graveyard shenanigans that we have. It's more so the fact that it even happens in Top Cut. One of my biggest things, the time rules should not be, the phase time rules should not be a thing in Top Cut. In Top Cut, there should be a completely different, both players should at least get a turn in Top Cut. I don't think that Top Cut matches and matches at Worlds should be decided by these time rules. That's all there is to it. That's my biggest gripe more than all. Now, and there's also the fact that it encourages, while you could make the case that it makes a lot of older cards that weren't relevant for a long time, such as Cowboy, playable again. The fact that people are I take my deck, for example, where I was at Locals last week and playing Zephyr and Endymion. People were telling me I needed to have Scarlight in my extra deck just so I could have some way to burn people in time, because I drew twice. So the fact that it encourages a lot of this slow playing, constant slow playing, and I don't think that's really something that most players enjoy. Now for me personally, most years, with the exception of last year, I'm not really going to Nationals, so I'm not going to go out of my way to, get a regional top. I don't think that's really worth it. And that's the main thing I think most of us have a problem with, is how it promotes a lot of shenanigans and a lot of just bad gameplay and unfun, cheesy wins. So what could Konami do to make this better? Well, I don't think we can go back to the 5-turn time rules. The biggest problem with this is that obviously it takes too dang long. So, and that's the main thing I think that's a lot of reason to change. So we've got to find somewhere kind of in the middle ground. I honestly think that both players should get a turn. I think that that's a reasonable thing to happen. I think while there will still be situations where your opponent drops Ghost Sister on you, and they win the game because you're about to go into time, at the same time, if both players have a turn, it makes it a lot more strategic. It means you might want to play a little faster before you hit time, and give your opponent the turn, and that way when time is called, you might get another turn to play. It adds a lot more strategy, I think, rather than, and it encourages, and in some, and it encourages people to play faster rather than play slower when the time gets closer. That's a big thing I think it will encourage, because, and especially in a day and age with cards like Sword Dragon being able to enable OTKs, what it'll do is it'll encourage people to play a little bit faster when time gets closer, rather than constantly checking graveyard to stall out the clock. I think that's kind of a middle ground. I think most players can agree that we don't want the 5-turn time rules where we're taking extra hour of 30-45 minutes in time, but we also don't want the cheesy little combos and wins with kind of game life point gain for game. We don't want that. So I think kind of coming into the middle, maybe giving both players a turn, I think is the optimal thing to do. I think that it's something that with judges you can actually enforce. You can get it down. You can get it all the way down. And the judges can make player. And the fact, because with the old time rules, judges would have to go to the table anyways. So what this does is it means that judges will go to the table, and players can make the players play faster on their own. So overall, I think this would be the optimal solution. I don't think I think the current time rules, while they have accomplished, I think, their main goal, which is shortening the amount of time an event takes. At the same time, I think we're all tired of these old little gimmicks and things, so I do think this would be the optimal solution. So anyway, guys, when you guys think of the time rules, what do you think should change? Is there something kind of, something else you think is a good idea that could work? Let me know down in the comment section below. And as always, I thank you guys for watching. Swarmstorm, signing out.